47 words. That's all it took. 47 words posted at 9:03 in the morning. And suddenly the President of the United States was declaring that Canada, America's single largest trading partner, was effectively banned. And so, not a tariff increase, not a diplomatic warning, a ban. In one Truth Social post, Donald Trump announced a complete suspension of all non-essential trade and travel between the United States and Canada, set to take effect in just 72 hours, unless Canada signed a new framework agreement immediately. Let that sink in for a moment. $2 billion in commerce moving across the border every single day. 9 million American jobs tied directly or indirectly to that relationship. 70 years of economic integration built through world wars, Cold War tensions, financial crisis, and even a global pandemic. None of those events ever stopped U.S.-Canada trade for a single day. And yet now, according to one social media post, it was all supposed to grind to a halt within 3 days. But here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. At the exact moment that tweet went live, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney was already standing at a podium in Ottawa, holding a live press conference broadcast across multiple international networks. CBC, BBC, World, Reuters, CNN, International, every camera already rolling. Then a journalist's phone buzzed. She raised her hand, and in a room full of reporters with cameras broadcasting to the entire world, she read the tweet out loud. The room fell silent. Every lens turned toward the podium, and suddenly the Prime Minister of Canada had about 4 seconds to decide how to respond to a sitting U.S. president announcing on social media that his country had just been banned. For a brief moment, the entire room froze. No aides rushed forward, no whispered briefing, no commercial break, just a prime minister standing at a podium while the world watched in real time. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters leaned forward, and Mark Carney took one slow breath. The kind of breath you only see from someone who has spent years managing financial crisis. The kind of calm that signals to markets and governments alike that panic is not part of the equation. Then he looked straight at the cameras and began to speak. "I've seen the post," he said, his voice steady and measured. "Let me respond directly." The room tightened. Every microphone captured the next sentence that would instantly echo around the world. "A tweet," Carn said, "is not a law." Just like that, no anger, no theatrics, just a calm, almost surgical explanation, he continued, making the point unmistakably clear. "A social media post," he said, "does not constitute a legal instrument under American domestic law. It is not binding under international treaty law, and it certainly does not qualify as an enforceable action under the rules of the World Trade Organization." Canada, he explained, would not be responding to a tweet. Canada would respond only to a formal legal instrument transmitted through proper diplomatic channels if one existed. A second reporter quickly jumped in. "Prime Minister, are you saying Canada is simply ignoring the President of the United States?" The question hung in the air. Carney didn't hesitate. He turned toward the reporter and answered with the same calm precision. "Canada applies the same standard to communications from any government," he said. "If it carries legal standing, we respond formally. If it does not, we acknowledge it and we continue governing." And with that single statement broadcast live across international television feeds, Canada made its position crystal clear. The tweet might dominate social media headlines, but in Ottawa, the government was treating it as political noise, not law. What happened next, however, proved that the world's financial markets were paying extremely close attention. Within minutes, the reaction began, and it didn't start on cable news. It started on Wall Street, in currency markets, and inside trading terminals around the world. Because professional traders don't wait for pundits to explain what just happened. They watch the signals and then they price the reality. And the signals coming out of that live broadcast were impossible to ignore. Within 20 minutes of Carney's response circulating across financial news networks, the U.S. dollar dropped roughly 1.3% against a basket of major currencies. Gold surged upward. Treasury yields shifted. The markets weren't simply reacting to political drama. They were reacting to something much more precise, a gap between a presidential declaration and the legal authority required to enforce it. In other words, markets recognized two completely different messages coming from the same story. On one side, a U.S. president had issued a sweeping economic threat through a social media post with no statute cited, no executive order, and no formal emergency declaration. On the other side, a G7 prime minister calmly explained live on international television that such a post had no legal standing under American law, international treaty law, or the rules governing global trade. When those two signals collide in real time, financial markets don't hesitate. They evaluate which one carries legal credibility, and they move accordingly, and the reaction spread fast. Within 40 minutes, finance ministers from three major G7 countries, Germany, France, and Japan, had already contacted Ottawa. Diplomatic sources later described the message as remarkably consistent. Canada, they said, held the legal high ground. The rules-based trade system mattered, and Canada's decision to treat the tweet as legally meaningless was the correct procedural response. Meanwhile, in London, the British Foreign Secretary issued a public statement calling the situation deeply concerning, while reaffirming support for the international trading system that the United States itself helped build decades ago. And before the morning was even over, the European Union's Trade Commissioner had convened an emergency coordination call with counterparts from Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. Think about that for a second. These were not adversaries mobilizing against the United States. These were American allies scrambling to understand and respond to an economic threat announced by Washington itself. And this is where the legal reality begins to hit like a brick wall, because under American law, a presidential tweet, no matter how dramatic, has absolutely no legal effect by itself. It isn't an executive order. It isn't a presidential proclamation. It isn't a national emergency declaration. It isn't even a formal diplomatic communication. In other words, posting on social media does not suddenly grant the authority to shut down the largest trading relationship on the planet. For something on that scale to actually happen, the president must invoke specific statutory powers, follow legal procedures, and issue a formal instrument that can withstand scrutiny from courts, Congress, and international agreements. And that's where the situation becomes extremely complicated for the White House. The tools that exist for a president to restrict trade all come with strict legal requirements. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, for example, requires a formal declaration of a national emergency and a clear finding that a foreign country poses a threat to us, national security, or the American economy. Imagine the legal storm that would follow if a U.S. president suddenly declared Canada a NATO ally, a NORAD partner, and the nation sharing the longest peaceful border on Earth, a national security threat. Constitutional scholars say such a move would almost certainly trigger immediate lawsuits in federal court and could be blocked before it ever took effect. Other trade authorities aren't any easier to use. Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act allows tariffs in the name of national security, but it requires a lengthy investigation process. Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974 also demands formal findings and procedural steps that take months, not 72 hours. In short, there was no clean legal pathway for the sweeping ban described in the tweet. Harvard constitutional law professor Lawrence Tribe went on television later that afternoon and put it bluntly: a trade ban announced through a social media post without citing legal authority has precisely zero legal effect until it becomes a formal government action. And that left the administration facing a dilemma that was both political and constitutional, and neither option looked good. And that dilemma is now sitting right in the center of a 72-hour countdown because the moment that tweet was posted, the clock started ticking, and the administration suddenly found itself trapped between two outcomes that both carry serious consequences. If the White House follows through and issues a formal executive order to enforce the ban, it must choose a legal authority to justify it. The moment that authority is cited, federal courts will examine it, and legal challenges will appear almost instantly. That means a federal judge could end up publicly ruling on the limits of presidential trade power. For any administration that prides itself on strength and dominance, the image of a court blocking its signature move would be politically devastating. But the other path may be just as damaging. If the 72 hours expire and no formal legal instrument appears, no executive order, no emergency declaration, no congressional action, then the conclusion becomes unavoidable. The tweet accomplished nothing. The ban never legally existed. And the statement Mark Carney made on live international television that a tweet is not a law will be remembered as the moment the gap between political messaging and legal authority was exposed for the entire world to see. That precedent doesn't disappear when the news cycle ends. Governments remember it, markets remember it, and the next time any American administration threatens economic action through social media alone, every finance ministry on earth will remember what happened here. Meanwhile, Canada has continued moving forward with its strategy. Trade disputes are already advancing through the USMCA legal system. Energy partnerships with Europe are expanding. Supply chains are being redirected toward allies in Asia. At every escalation in this confrontation, Canada has responded faster, more precisely, and with stronger legal footing than Washington expected. This isn't improvisation, it's preparation. And that preparation has allowed Canada to face down a presidential threat, calmly explain why it carried no legal force, and continue governing without blinking. Now, the world is watching the clock. When that 72-hour deadline arrives, one simple question will be answered. Was that tweet the beginning of a historic trade confrontation, or the moment the limits of presidential power were revealed in front of the entire world?